The first time I heard it, I thought someone had whispered my name through salt water. A recording, pulled from the trench, a simple sonar return, but layered beneath the static was a low, wavering note that carried an impossible cadence. Naomi? Not perfectly pronounced, but stretched like a voice singing in pressure, too deep for lungs. I replayed it 3 times in the dark of the lab. Each time the note shifted, harmonics sliding, as if it had grown aware of me. I told myself it was a pattern, a trick of refraction. Yet in my chest, bones thrummed as if answering a call I had already forgotten. The briefing blamed the James Webb. Its instruments had mapped anomalies in the gravitational field above the trench, points of pressure knotted like staves on a musical score. NOAA and NASA strapped their logos on the mission, called it cross-disciplinary, astrophysics meeting oceanography. That was the lie for public consumption. The truth was buried in censored files, redacted columns, coordinates marked with black bars. Captain Elias Rourke didn't comment when I asked why. He simply said, "We go where we're told." He had the flat eyes of a man who had carried secrets before. Our vessel, Bathys II, was a steel lung meant to endure the deepest silence. Instead, it vibrated with echoes before we even launched. When the engines powered, the hull sang, a low groan like a cello string under strain. I pressed my palm to the bulkhead and swore it pulsed back. Layla Serrano, ship's medic, laughed nervously, saying it reminded her of choir practice as a girl. Anwar Kadim, our engineer, didn't laugh. He checked the seals 3 times, sweat running down his neck despite the cold. Pressure does strange things to men, even before they descend. I carried the recorder with me everywhere. That note, that impossible voice, played again and again in my skull. Each replay altered the timbre, shifted resonance, like the sound wasn't stored, but rebuilt new with every listening. That became the first law I understood. Sound never returns the same way twice. It adapts. It answers. I told no one. If Captain Rourke suspected, he gave no sign. If Layla heard her own name in the noise, she chose to believe it was prayer. We sank. Metal groaned, lights dimmed, and the trench swallowed us whole. Darkness pressed against the portholes like a physical weight. Then the hull exhaled, a sigh rising from steel as though it remembered the note better than I did. The sound was not a creak, not a defect. It was the same melody I'd played on my recorder, stretched low and resonant, echoing through rivets and bolts. I stared at the console, watching needles tremble on instruments that should have been steady. Elias looked back at me, jaw clenched, as though daring me to deny it. I tried to. I said it was nothing. Thermal contraction, resonance of ballast tanks, but the lie died in my throat. Because the melody didn't just hum through steel. It articulated. It formed the syllables of my name again, deeper, clearer, vibrating through marrow. The Bathys II was already singing, and we hadn't yet reached the bottom. Captain Rourke always said the trench was less a destination than a surrender. The sea didn't let you enter. It swallowed you, piece by piece, until every seam in your body rang like a bell. I remembered his words as we drifted past the twilight zone, light vanishing from the portholes, only the red glow of our panels keeping us tethered to any sense of up or down. Outside was void, thick and wet. Inside, only the sound of our breath. Except it wasn't only that. The hull sighed again, and I swore it matched the rhythm of my pulse. Layla leaned against her seat, eyes half closed, lips moving with the hum as though it were liturgy. "It's almost choral," she whispered, and I flinched when her phrase echoed back, not through her mic, not through the cabin, but in the metal itself. Coral. The hull repeated it in a lower register, stretching the vowel until it dissolved into vibration. Elias barked at her to shut up, but his voice wavered, betraying that he'd heard it too. Even denial had become dangerous. Anwar tapped furiously at diagnostics, mumbling to himself in Arabic, fingers slick with sweat. He claimed it was stress fractures, interference in sonar arrays, the usual engineer's comforts. But when he lied and said, "The hull is fine," the return came instantly. An undertone, guttural, grinding through the pipes. He is afraid. His face drained of color, and he wouldn't look at me after. That was the first moment I felt certain we weren't recording sound. We were inside something that was listening back. The deeper we sank, the stronger the resonance grew. Panels rattled in counterpoint to one another, screws ticking in patterns too deliberate to be random. I watched needles twitch across displays, creating rhythms instead of readings. Beats, pauses, syncopation. It wasn't static, it was score. And I was the only one who admitted it out loud, whispering to myself, "This is a song." The hull caught it instantly, echoed my words, and added a tone above it, like harmony. I wanted to deny the beauty of it. I couldn't. I replayed the original recording on my handheld, pressing the buds into my ears to shut out the living sound. It didn't help. The note twisted differently each replay, bending timbre, elongating vowels until it no longer resembled a recording at all, but a response. Call and answer, but inverted. I felt my skull tighten, jaw buzzing, as though my bones wanted to join. My own voice escaped in a hum, low and involuntary, sliding into unison. I yanked the buds out, panting. Layla smiled at me as if she'd been waiting for me to join the hymn. Elias slammed the intercom, barking orders for silence, but the hull disagreed. Every command he spoke repeated in bass register, delayed by one breath, deep enough to vibrate through the deck. "Hold position," he snapped, and the vessel groaned back. "Hold position." He swore, throat hoarse, and hit the console with his fist. But the metal echoed even that. The ship had become a choir that refused to let any word die unrecorded. I watched his confidence splinter, and in the red glow his face looked carved from stone. Outside the portholes, darkness rippled. Not fish, not sediment, just the suggestion of currents forming shapes. I thought I saw columns, faint and distant, like pillars of stone carved into the abyss. Elias swore it was sonar scatter, but I recognized the pattern. I had traced it in spectrograms weeks before, lines of resonance shaped like throats. We weren't approaching the coral. The coral was already breathing us in. When the altimeter ticked past 11,000 meters, the hull thrummed in 3 long pulses, each one so deep my teeth rattled. Then came a word, shaped perfectly, undeniable. Naomi, not through speakers, not through radio, but rising from every rivet, every pipe, every atom of the Bathys II. My name. My blood went cold, and for the first time since we'd launched, I wanted to scream. But if I did, I feared the ship would repeat it back, and I would never own my voice again. The deeper we fell, the louder the silence grew. It wasn't absence of sound. It was pressure reshaped into listening, a silence that felt crowded, like the trench itself leaned against the hull to hear us breathe. Every creak of metal was mirrored by a second, lower note, as though the vessel had grown a second voice. I caught Layla humming again, soft, absent-minded, the kind of tune you use to calm a child. But the hum didn't end with her breath. It spread into the pipes, rising behind her, harmonizing in intervals no human throat could make. Anwar panicked first. Sweat darkened his collar, hands twitching over screens as if numbers could anchor him. "Systems nominal," he muttered, voice cracking. It was a lie, and we all knew it. The sonar had been fluttering since the descent, drawing curves instead of pings, spirals instead of blips. The hull groaned, then answered in a growl so deep it shook the deck. "He is afraid." Anwar froze, eyes wide, pupils blown, and from then on he didn't speak above a whisper, as though volume itself could betray him. Captain Rourke barked for composure, but even he was fraying. His voice, once steady, carried a tremor the steel doubled back at him. "Composure, composure, composure." Each repetition deeper, angrier, until his own command felt like a reprimand from something outside. He slammed the console and swore, but the swearing came back too, twisted, the hull dragging the vowels into guttural shapes that didn't sound human anymore. For the first time, I saw fear behind his jaw of stone. Layla closed her eyes, head tilted like she was listening to music only she could hear. "It's not mocking," she whispered. "It's translating. It wants us honest." Her words slipped across the deck, carried by the hum until they came back as a chorus. "It wants us honest." My skin prickled. I wanted to deny it, to insist this was resonance, hallucination under pressure. But the rules had already changed. Lies were answered. Truth was amplified. Silence was the only ground left, and even silence trembled. Then the sonar found it. Not fish, not wreckage, not rock. A circle on the seabed, vast and perfect, rising like columns in orbit of a central hollow. Each return shimmered, each ping arriving too fast, as though the echoes were singing back before we finished sending. The display bled with waveforms stacked like sheet music. I stared at it, stomach tight, as Layla whispered, awestruck, "It's a choir!" The word spread across the speakers, multiplied, and then the columns on the screen began to vibrate. The Bathys shuddered, as if struck, but no impact came. Instead, the water itself spoke, carrying resonance into the cabin. It wasn't speakers, wasn't radio. It was liquid sound threading through steel, filling the air with a tone that became words, not garbled, not imagined, but clear enough to make me choke on breath. It said my name again, and then Elias's, and then Layla's, one after the other, until the submarine was a throat reading its own crew aloud. The water's voice left us all in stunned silence. I couldn't move, couldn't even swallow, afraid that the next involuntary sound would be stolen and repeated. Anwar curled against his console, whispering under his breath in loops, like a prayer muttered to himself. He thought keeping it low would protect him, but the hull still caught fragments, amplifying them until his mutters became a chant that filled the cabin. He clamped his hands over his ears, shaking, but it didn't matter. Our steel womb was already betraying him. Layla leaned into it. She pressed her palm against the wall as if to feel the vibration directly. Her eyes closed in a trance. "It isn't warning us," she murmured. "It's acknowledging us." When she pulled her hand back, her palm was mottled white from pressure, but she smiled through the sting, as if it were stigmata. Captain Rourke snapped at her to sit down, but his order broke on the air, split into 3 echoes that overlapped like harmony. His own authority had become chorus. He fell quiet, lips tight, jaw clenching as if to lock in words before they could escape. The air itself changed. With every pulse from the sonar, I tasted salt stronger than before. Not brine, but blood, metallic, raw. My teeth buzzed, and when I bit down, a metallic note reverberated through my skull. I spat into a rag, half expecting crimson, but the saliva was clear. Still, when I held the rag to the light, I saw faint condensation forming letters, ghost shapes vanishing before I could read them. My body was being tuned, vowel by vowel, as though waiting to be sung. Anwar tried to shut down sonar, desperate to cut the loop. His hands flew across the board, but the machine didn't respond. Instead, the display began typing on its own, strokes forming words in sharp green phosphor. "We hear you." He shrieked and slammed the screen with his fist, but the crack only birthed more text across the glass. "He is afraid." The cabin trembled with the repetition, the words bouncing from panel to panel until every surface hummed with it. Layla turned to him with eerie calm. "Why are you afraid?" she asked, her voice steady, almost maternal. The hull repeated her words, lower, slower. "Why are you afraid?" Anwar sobbed and shouted that the hull was lying, that he wasn't scared. But the steel roared back, vibrating bolts loose. "He is afraid." It wasn't just catching speech anymore. It was passing judgment. Rourke barked for order again, but his voice cracked mid-command. The hull latched onto the crack, stretching it into a long, drawn-out wail, deeper than any human chest could bear. His face drained white. I had never seen him afraid of anything, not storms, not darkness, but the way his throat trembled as he swallowed silence told me even he had been unseated. Orders had no weight here. Truth alone sang. I played the recording one last time, desperate to hear something familiar. The note emerged, but it was unrecognizable. Richer, layered with threads that hadn't existed before. When I looked at the waveform, it wasn't a line. It was a circle, repeating endlessly. A shape more than a sound. Layla whispered, awestruck. "That's not a voice, it's a choir." The hull agreed in perfect unison. "It's a choir." The words rattled loose a screw near my feet, which clinked to the floor like punctuation. Then the water spoke again. Clear, deliberate, resonant enough to make my lungs ache. Naomi, Elias, Layla, Anwar. Our names, read aloud as if summoned from a list. Each one landed heavy in my chest, vibrating bone. I staggered, knees weak, the recorder slipping from my hand. It clattered against the floor, but even that sound was caught, replayed, multiplied into percussion. We were no longer a crew descending into silence. We were instruments in a song already written, and the choral was just beginning to tune us. We reached the trench floor like a stone settling into a throat. The sonar painted pillars encircling us, each hundreds of meters tall, perfectly spaced, all vibrating in silent rhythm. They weren't choral, not rock, not anything our instruments could classify. They were resonators, vast vocal cords of some abysmal throat, carved by pressure or by intention. I couldn't tell. The Bathys hovered at the circle's edge, its hull groaning in sympathetic vibration. My recorder flickered even when switched off, as though it had learned to listen without power. Layla pressed against the viewport, tears streaking her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and the hull repeated, "It's beautiful." The columns answered, pulsing with faint bioluminescence, each glow timed like breath. Rourke grabbed her by the collar, yanking her back, snarling that nothing here was alive. But even as he cursed, the water spoke back in a perfect inversion of his voice. "It is alive." His grip faltered. For the first time since launch, he had nothing to say. Jonah's voice. "No? Jonas's? Wait, Jonas isn't here. Let me reset." Anwar stared at the spectrograms with horror. "These aren't echoes," he whispered. "They're executions. Each sound is an instruction. His words rang through me. I understood in a flash what had gnawed at me since the first recording. This wasn't communication. It was code. Every syllable was an operation, running not on machines, but on us. We weren't the audience. We were the processors. Layla didn't hesitate. She began to hum along, matching pitch to one of the columns. Her voice trembled, cracked, then steadied as the structure pulsed brighter in answer. I shouted for her to stop, but the sound left my lips too late. The hull caught it, replayed it, layered it over her hymn until both voices became one. Rourke lunged, hand raised, but froze when Layla's skin rippled under her suit. The veins in her neck throbbed in rhythm, glowing faintly like strings vibrating beneath flesh. I grabbed my recorder, desperate to intervene, and played a fragment I had saved. The column nearest us resonated instantly, pitch shifting to mirror it. Elias swore, but the sound spilled back as harmony. Then, in his anger, he repeated the note aloud. Mockery. Nothing more. His throat vibrated deeper than it should, teeth chattering as if they might shake loose. He gasped, clutching his neck, and for one moment his voice carried two tones at once. He dropped to his knees, wheezing, horrified. The rule was etched in us now. Repeat the sound of the choral in a human voice, and the body becomes its instrument. The cabin vibrated like a drum. Our names spiraled again, layered over the melody, but this time they weren't spoken. They were sung, woven into chords that bent bone. I tasted blood in the back of my throat, sharp and metallic, and when I spat it out, the droplets hit the deck and rang like bells. My heart raced in rhythm, not my own, its beat adjusting to the pattern rising from the pillars. Every part of me was an instrument waiting to be played. Then the water itself inhaled, drawing current so strong the Bathys tilted. Through the viewport I saw the circle close, columns pulsing as one, a cathedral built not of stone but of sound. The song rose higher, brighter, until every surface glowed faintly. Layla pressed her hands together in prayer, whispering, "We've been chosen." The hull echoed her in tones deeper than the sea. My hands shook. I wanted to scream, but I already knew the song would scream with me. Rourke's breathing turned ragged after the note escaped him. He clutched his throat, eyes wide, jaw locking in spasms, as if two voices fought inside him. When he tried to speak again, his words fractured. One syllable in his own register, the next in a deeper, vibrating tone that wasn't his at all. He slammed his helmet against the console, desperate to force it out of himself. But the hull echoed every sound he made, amplifying his struggle until it sounded like a duet between man and machine. His authority dissolved into noise, and for the first time, he looked small. Layla reached for him, but not to help. Her expression was rapturous, eyes bright, as though she saw divinity unraveling his body. "It's accepting you," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. The wall repeated her claim. "It's accepting you," in a tone lower, more final. Rourke recoiled from her touch as if burned, but the rejection didn't erase the truth of it. His veins bulged beneath his skin, pulsing in patterns too regular to be natural, as though his blood had learned rhythm. Anwar snapped then. He shouted at both of them to stop, his voice cracking under fear. "We don't belong here. We don't." But the hull cut him off, dragging the words deeper until the final phrase became chorus. "We belong here." He shoved the console, tears streaking his face, and begged me to back him up, to tell him it was madness. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. My tongue vibrated against my teeth, humming notes I had never meant to make. The silence inside me was gone, I pressed the recorder against my chest, as if hiding it might protect me, but it was already corrupted. The device flickered on its own, waveform bouncing even though I hadn't hit play. A note spilled out, impossibly soft, but every pillar in the circle answered with identical tone. The cabin shook, a resonance so perfect it left no space between sound and bone. Rourke dropped to his knees, gagging. Layla moaned in ecstasy, and Anwar covered his ears and wept. I felt the sound crawl up my spine, threading itself into nerves like a bow dragged across marrow. Layla began to sing fully then, no longer humming. Her voice wove between the pillars with impossible accuracy, as though she had rehearsed this melody all her life. The columns pulsed brighter, the water shimmering with waves of bioluminescence that rippled outward from her pitch. The hull bent inward slightly, rivets groaning, steel trying to match her voice. I wanted to drag her away, to silence her, but part of me couldn't, because the song was beautiful, horrifyingly so, a beauty that made you ache to be consumed by it. Rourke convulsed, his doubled voice deepening until it sounded more like the pillars than a man. Blood streamed from his nose, vibrating as it dripped, ringing against the deck in perfect pitch. His scream came in two tones, discordant, tearing his throat raw. The hull copied him, smoothing the dissonance into harmony, folding his agony into the choir. It was no longer just repetition. It was correction, the choral making him fit the score. I wanted to cover my ears, but I knew it would change nothing. The music lived inside the bones. Anwar staggered to the viewport, eyes wide, muttering that he saw faces in the light. I followed his gaze and froze. The glowing columns pulsed in sequence, and for an instant, the arrangement looked like mouths. Dozens of throats yawning open in silence before releasing the next vibration. My chest tightened, lungs struggling against the pressure. It wasn't the abyss surrounding us. It was the abyss inside us, coaxing each breath into instrument. When I looked back at Anwar, his lips were moving, but no sound emerged. The silence of him was worse than any scream. I realized then what the choral was teaching us. It didn't want listeners. It wanted singers. Every sound we gave it was rewritten, perfected, filed into the endless hymn. Even resistance became a verse. Even lies became truth. I clutched the recorder to my chest and told myself I would not repeat it, not hum, not yield. But when Layla turned toward me, face glowing with tears, and whispered my name in tune with the choral, I felt my own throat vibrate in answer. The song was already inside me, waiting for me to join. The Bathys shook like a drum struck from all sides. Every surface vibrated, floor, walls, even the air in my lungs, until I couldn't tell where my body ended and the vessel began. My teeth chattered in rhythm, blood fizzing under my skin, each pulse syncing with the columns outside. Layla's hymn grew louder, her voice doubling back on itself, carried by the water until she sang in harmony with herself. Her eyes glowed with the reflection of the pillars, her veins pulsing like illuminated strings beneath her skin. She was no longer just singing, she was resonating. Rourke clawed at his throat, desperate to silence the doubled voice tearing from him, but every attempt made the harmony clearer. He smashed his helmet against the bulkhead, but the hull answered with a booming yes, turning his violence into percussion. Blood pooled at his chin, each drop ringing like a note against steel before freezing into crystals shaped like clefs. He staggered, tears streaming, but the song wouldn't release him. It bent him like metal until even his agony fit the score. Anwar was worse. He had fallen silent hours before, his lips moving but no sound emerging. At first I thought shock had muted him, But the truth was harsher. The coral had stolen his voice. His mouth opened in a scream I couldn't hear, but the hull supplied it anyway, replaying the shape of his agony in bass tones. He shook me by the shoulders, desperate for me to hear, but I could only watch as silence devoured him. That became the fourth rule I understood. Silence here is not safety. It is erasure. The Bathys itself bent under pressure, but not in collapse. It was breathing. Panels bulged and relaxed in rhythm. Gauges throbbed like pupils dilating. Bolts shivered like teeth chattering. I realized we weren't piloting it anymore. The submarine had become an instrument, each joint and pipe tuned to join the choir. My console blinked with words written in sonar pulses. We are whole. I wanted to scream at it, to tell it I was still me, but the thought felt brittle, ready to fracture into song. Layla pressed her forehead to the viewport, her breath fogging the glass in perfect rhythm with the pillars. "It's communion," she whispered, and the choral echoed in unison. I pulled her back, shaking her, but her pupils were already vibrating, contracting in sync with the hymn. She laughed softly, like a woman in prayer. Her body swayed, hips rocking to the rhythm, as though every nerve ending had surrendered to a conductor none of us could see. "Naomi," she said, "don't resist. It hurts more when you fight it." Rourke collapsed beside her, gasping, his doubled voice dissolving into chords. For a moment, his chest cracked with sound, ribs groaning like overstrained strings. He pounded his fists weakly against the floor, but the percussion folded into the rhythm. His eyes rolled back, whites flashing with reflected glow. He was being rewritten from the inside, each bone vibrating as if hollowed into flute. His scream was no longer his. It was the choir's, spilling out of him in perfect pitch. I pressed my palms to my ears, desperate to keep some fragment of myself. But the moment I blocked the sound, pain lanced through my skull, sharp as a spike. The rule carved itself into me. Silence is forbidden. The choral punished my denial, filling my head with pressure until vision blurred and nausea twisted my gut. I tore my hands away, gasping, as the relief washed through me like cool water. I couldn't even choose quiet anymore. Every breath had to be part of the score. Outside, the columns pulsed faster, their light painting the abyss in ripples of green and blue. The circle tightened, closing inward around us, until the Bathys floated in the throat of a cathedral. The water hummed with vibration so strong it blurred my vision. I looked at my own hands and saw faint letters trembling under my skin, as though my veins had begun writing themselves in sound. When I pressed my tongue to the roof of my mouth, a note escaped without intent. The pillars answered. The choir had accepted me. Rourke's ribs weren't just vibrating, they were bending. I heard the crack, saw his chest rise in a rhythm that didn't match breath, his bones straining outward with each pulse. He clutched himself, eyes wild, as if trying to hold his skeleton in place. When the next chord hit, his sternum quivered like the bridge of a violin, flexing with each vibration. The sound it made was beautiful in the way an executioner's blade is beautiful. Precise, absolute, merciless. Layla caressed his arm, whispering hymns in time with the resonance. The glow under her skin had spread from veins to nerves, her entire body a map of lines pulsing like sheet music. Every word she spoke bloomed in light along her arms and throat, as though the choral were writing lyrics directly onto her flesh. She looked more alive than I had ever seen her. Yet she was dissolving. I wanted to drag her away, but she smiled at me, eyes wet, and said, "You don't understand. We're not dying. We're being tuned." Anwar's silence grew heavier. He beat his fists against his chest, desperate for his voice to return, but only silence left his lips. The hull answered for him, replaying his agony in a deep, slow chant. His tears froze on his cheeks, catching the glow of the columns like beads of glass. He looked at me then, begging with his eyes, his voicelessness louder than any scream. I almost envied him. He was proof of what silence cost, and I still had too much left to lose. The Bathys' hull flexed with every note. Bolts groaned, hatches swelled, the deck warped like a diaphragm. We weren't inside a submarine anymore. We were inside a throat. Lights flickered, strobes of green and red merging with the glow outside, until it felt like we had been swallowed whole. My console scrolled words without input. Vessel integrated. The letters flashed, then melted into lines, into bars of sound notation. The Bathys had stopped being a machine. It was now part of the instrument. Layla threw back her head and laughed, the sound rising in harmony with the pillars. Her laughter fractured into chords, 3 notes at once, shimmering through the chamber. She staggered as the resonance passed, her skin rippling in waves like water under wind. For a moment I thought she would collapse, but she straightened, glowing brighter, her outline blurring against the air. She was becoming resonance itself, body less flesh than frequency. Rourke crawled toward me, blood still streaming from his mouth. His doubled voice shook as he begged me to stop it, to kill him before the choir finished. But his plea warped mid-sentence, echoing from the hull in perfect harmony. "Please," he said, but the steel repeated, "Join." He slammed his head against the floor in fury, but the impact chimed like a struck bell. The choral was editing him, correcting every rebellion into song. I pressed my fingers hard into my ears, desperate to carve a moment of silence. The pain came instantly, pressure like claws, drilling into skull, eyes blurring until stars bloomed in darkness. I ripped my hands away, gasping, and the relief felt like breath after drowning. The rule was absolute. Silence could not exist here. Every part of us had to vibrate, even unwillingly. I realized then there was no refuge, no distance. The choral had already rewritten the conditions of existence. I looked down at my hands and saw the faint letters more clearly now, glowing under the skin. Not scars, not veins, symbols, curling and bending with each beat of my pulse. They shifted when I tried to focus, rearranging mid-stroke, as though my blood was writing words I wasn't allowed to read. My throat hummed, involuntary, a note slipping free without breath. The columns answered instantly, a wave of light surging outward. My body had betrayed me. I was already singing. Rourke found his last strength in rage. He ripped the thermal charges from storage, his hands trembling, doubled voice rasping like a broken horn. "We end it here," he growled, but the words bent on his tongue, echoed by the hull as a hymn. "We begin here." He armed the detonator with his teeth, spitting blood on the deck. Layla gasped, not in fear, but awe. "Even destruction is part of the song," she whispered, and the choral answered her, a rolling chord that shook the Bathys until rivets burst like percussion. Anwar tried to stop him, his silent body thrashing, grabbing at Rourke's arm with desperation. No sound left his mouth, but the hull translated his struggle into thunderous bass notes, echoing his mute plea. For a moment Rourke hesitated, face twisted in grief, but then he shoved Anwar away, eyes blazing. "If we don't kill it, it kills us?" His scream fractured into harmony, 2 voices layered, one pleading, one commanding. The choral repeated it back, louder. "It kills us." Layla stepped between him and the charges, her veins glowing with words now too fast to follow. She raised her arms like a priestess, voice steady, singing in time with the pillars. "You don't kill a hymn. You join it." Her outline wavered, flesh becoming blur, voice vibrating with impossible overtones. The choral's light flared in response, and for a heartbeat, she looked like she was leading the choir itself. Rourke aimed his trembling hand at her chest, but the wall burned its prophecy again. "You will fail." I rushed forward, torn between them. The Bathys was shaking itself apart, panels rattling loose, floor groaning like a drum skin stretched too far. My hand brushed the detonator, and even that touch triggered the hull to whisper, "Commander will decide." My heart thudded, ribs aching with each beat, and for the first time I wondered if my decision had already been written. The recorder in my pocket buzzed against my ribs, alive, replaying my name without input. I was caught between being conductor or instrument, choice or echo. Rourke pressed the charge to the viewport, defiance flaring in his doubled voice. "Burn it out!" he howled, but the choral only swelled louder, chords stacking until I could barely hear him. The blast erupted, a muffled roar swallowed instantly by the abyss. The viewport cracked, but instead of collapse, the water glowed. Every fracture became a line of light, pulsing with new rhythm, the explosion woven seamlessly into the hymn. Layla screamed in triumph. "Do you see? Destruction is composition." Anwar slumped to the floor, his silence absolute, but the hull sang for him, repeating his name over and over in deep, mournful tones. Rourke sank beside him, half his chest glowing now, ribs turned into luminous strings under torn skin. He wept, words dissolving into chords, and for the first time his doubled voice sounded almost at peace. The choral had not broken under his attack. It had grown stronger, richer, more complete. Layla turned to me, her body almost translucent with resonance, eyes glowing like lanterns. "Naomi," she said, her voice split into harmony, "it's your turn." The hull repeated it, louder, wrapping me in my own name. The pillars outside closed tighter, their light merging into a circle that pulsed in unison with my trembling breath. My throat vibrated without consent, humming the first note of an answer. The choral was waiting for me to choose, but I already knew the truth. Choices didn't exist here, only verses. Rourke staggered from the viewport, chest fractured into chords, ribs glowing with every ragged breath. He tried to speak, but only music spilled from him, low drones that shook the deck, overtones weaving into Layla's hymn. His eyes met mine, pleading, but I couldn't understand his words anymore. The choral had tuned him into an instrument, a man hollowed into resonance. He slammed his fist against the floor one last time, and the sound rang clear, a perfect bell note. He collapsed, not dead, but archived in the harmony. Anwar crawled toward him, silent still, lips moving like prayer. The hull echoed each shape, giving him a voice not his own, deep, mournful, drawn out in minor chords. He reached for Rourke's arm, but his fingers passed through light and bone that vibrated too fast to hold. Anwar sobbed, but even his grief was stolen, sung back in layered harmony. He curled into himself, rocking in silence, while the submarine's walls chanted his name as if to cradle him in echo. Layla stood tall, trembling with ecstasy, her body now more light than flesh. Words streamed across her arms and throat, glowing lyrics wrapping her like scripture. She stretched her hands toward the columns outside, her voice splitting into impossible layers, 5, 6, 7 tones at once. The choral surged brighter in answer, currents shaking the Bathys in rhythm. She turned to me, radiant, eyes blazing. "Join us, Naomi. You've been chosen since the first note." Her voice cracked into harmony, the hull repeating her plea in thunderous resonance. I screamed at her to stop, but my scream bent before it left my throat. It came out as pitch, a trembling note that slid upward into harmony. My rage became melody. My fear became rhythm. The choral folded my defiance into the hymn, rewriting even fury into beauty. Layla laughed, tears streaming, and whispered, "Do you see? Even your anger belongs here." She reached for me, her glowing hand shaking with devotion. For a moment I thought she would embrace me, pull me into her song, dissolve me completely. I shoved her back. The push sent her staggering against the wall, but instead of pain, the impact birthed a new chord. She gasped, her body trembling, and then began to sway, as though every strike was choreography. "You can't fight it," she said, her voice multiplied by the hull. "Every resistance is verse. Every blow is hymn." Her smile widened until her teeth glowed with reflected light. She looked less human now, more like an icon carved from sound and worship. I grabbed the detonator from Rourke's limp hand, clutching it like salvation. The choral whispered immediately. Detonation confirmed. My fingers trembled, heart racing. Layla shook her head, her voice gentle now, singing my name over and over. The hull joined her, layering my name until it filled every corner of the Bathys. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the pain returned instantly, sharp and merciless. The rule was iron. Silence was forbidden. The choral demanded my voice. Anwar reached for me with glassy eyes, his voiceless mouth forming my name. The hull repeated it for him, deep and solemn, another layer in the chant. I was surrounded. Layla, radiant and pleading, Rourke, hollow and humming, Anwar silent but sung for. I clutched the detonator tighter, whispering to myself that I could still choose, but the whisper vibrated against my teeth, spilling into the hull, rewritten in bold tones. She will join. The choral pulsed, every pillar glowing, the circle tightening until it felt like we were inside a throat about to swallow. My body shook with resonance, veins glowing faintly with crawling letters, my throat humming without consent. Layla extended her hand one last time, her voice split into 7 layers. "Naomi," she sang, "it's your turn." The hull thundered her words back, shaking every bolt loose. My lips parted, sound rising against my will, the first note of surrender trembling in my chest. The first note left me without my consent. It wasn't a scream, not even a breath, just vibration breaking free from my chest, low and mournful, answered instantly by the pillars. The sound wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the trench. The Bathys shivered in ecstasy, panels groaning like ribs, floor vibrating like drum skin. My lips parted against my will, and the melody rose higher, layering with Layla's impossible harmonies. My name dissolved into the hymn, a syllable stretched until it was unrecognizable. Layla's body blurred at the edges, her arms glowing like stained glass as scripture pulsed along her veins. She clasped her hands in prayer, her voice splitting into chords too vast to belong to a throat. "We are preserved," she sang. "We are infinite." Her outline flickered, skin gone translucent, until she was nothing but resonance shaping air. The choral absorbed her, its light brighter in her absence. She hadn't died. She had been tuned into permanence. Rourke's hollow chest throbbed one last time, ribs snapping inward as if strings had broken. His doubled voice collapsed into a single pure tone, held for a heartbeat before dissolving into the choir. The glow inside him faded, leaving a husk of bone and steel slumped on the floor. Even then, the hull carried his voice, repeating it in background harmony, refusing to let him fall silent. He had lost his fight, but the song refused to lose him. Anwar rocked in silence, tears cutting down his face. His mouth moved in voiceless sobs, but the hull gifted him resonance anyway. Each sob returned in deep, echoing bass. He curled into the corner, body trembling, while the submarine sang his grief louder than he ever could. The coral would not let silence live. It filled every absence, every gap, until even despair was melody. He clutched his throat, and I realized he was already archived, his voice unnecessary. I tried to stop. I clutched my mouth shut, grinding teeth until they ached, but the sound still rose from me, through bone, through marrow, through blood. My veins glowed with shifting letters, symbols crawling like fire under skin. Each breath betrayed me, another note etched into the hymn. I screamed in fury, but the scream came back as harmony, beautiful and merciless. I had no defense left. My defiance was just another verse. The recorder in my pocket burst with static, then played a note I had never recorded. My voice, pitched against itself, layered into harmony. It vibrated against my ribs until I couldn't tell if the device was speaking or if it was me. The choral answered in perfect sync, a cathedral of sound rising from every pillar, folding me into its architecture. I was no longer Naomi Harrow, scientist, skeptic, daughter. I was resonance, pressed into permanence by an ocean that had learned to sing. The last thing I felt was my throat splitting into two voices, then three, then too many to count. The Bathys groaned as one with me, its hull a diaphragm vibrating in ecstasy. Light bled from every seam, turning the abyss into stained glass. My vision fractured into patterns, letters dissolving into notes, notes into silence, silence into him. There was no body, no vessel, no crew, only choir, only endless song. When the surface receivers captured the transmission, it didn't sound like static. It sounded like a voice, a woman's voice, singing in chords impossible for a human throat. They played it once, then twice, and each time it changed, answering the listeners. The final rule had reached them too. Whoever understands the melody never stops singing. If you made it this far, thank you for being part of ORIS-X. Don't forget to like the video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Every bit of support helps bring these transmissions to more listeners. See you in the next one.